Hey guys. So today we kind of talked on the WeChat group a little bit about what we're doing, but um, today's the 28th. We have class period 2 today. Um, so we are going to be looking at our final new topic. Well, it's not even really new since a lot of it is actually just a big review thing. But yeah, a little review of some development ideas and really just in general economic ideas. Um, Reason why this is really helpful is because it brings a lot of the course together, um, and it'll really help you in your evaluations, especially in part D of paper 2, which this is where I kind of feel it's the most um, helpful. Um, I will share that. Okay. So what we're looking at here, this is I'll post. I don't know how many of you have this, so I will post it. But what we're really looking at is like, how should governments operate? How should a government decide between what type of policies and what approach they choose to take? And that's really what this is looking at. And when you start to think about it, it'll help you think about, like, hopefully you're like, oh, this is an evaluation, this is part D, this is part B of paper 1. um, this will kind of help me understand that there are two approaches to a lot of the different economic arguments, and no matter which one you're making, you need to discuss both of them. A good evaluation looks at both sides. We kind of talked about this a little bit with your IAs as well. To get full marks at the end of your IA in the last section, which is so hard, is you need to really show a balanced approach and looking at everything. And the same thing is true in part D of paper 2 and part B of paper 1, is that you need to have that balanced view. Look at both sides. Um, and that's really what we're going to do here, is we're going to be looking at the strengths and weaknesses of market-oriented policies, the strengths and weaknesses of interventionist policies, and then we're going to look at how do we balance those approaches. Um, so we're going to be looking at, you can see it here, we're going to be looking at free market versus intervention, um, Keynesian versus new classical, and then kind of a mix of different versions of um, different economic thoughts. That's kind of the basic idea here. So we'll kind of go through it. It's 7 slides. Well, not really, but it's pretty short. So we should be able to get through most of it since it is kind of a review. Um, so we kind of, on the last chapter 32, kind of with the IMF stuff, we talked about that the economies really since the 70s have really been making this shift um, away from the private or the public companies holding things and kind of moving into a private hand. And the reason why this was done is that countries grew to a point where the government was owning a lot of the factors of production, and that became problematic. So what, excuse me. Hey, can I have some water? Sorry. So what became so what became the norm was kind of trying to move away from that through that liberalized approach to the to development, that liberalized approach to development. So um, that is kind of what we're looking at here, is what type of approach to development is most important. Because what we saw is that we saw that the public sector was getting too big. It was inefficient. Um, there wasn't private competition, and for HLs, we this is something we've kind of talked about is that if oligopolies get too powerful, then they start to be able to act like monopolies. And if that becomes the case, then there's a lack of competition within the market, and that can lead to a point where businesses are able to control prices or set prices. And that might not be the best in the best interest of the consumers. And what kind of caused this shift towards more market-based economies, and this is something we've kind of already addressed, is that in the 1970s, in the 1980s, when there was that massive public debt issue where banks were lending way too much and they realized that you can't do that. But it also coincided with um, this like Cold War communist kind of mentality um, that a lot of Western countries were kind of pushing back against this idea of communism. And one of the ways they did this was through the liberalization of the economy, trying to show that capitalism can work and it is the best approach. And then you also saw kind of in Asian countries, you saw the emergence of um, the like strong Asian economies that we previously talked about. We saw the resurgence of Hong Kong. We saw um, development of Taiwan. We saw Singapore really start developing. We saw Japan just explode with development as well. So there was a shift away from big government spending and a move towards privatization. And that also in the West, and that linked to growth in um, parts of Asia as well through the same model. Um, the stuff that I'm talking about here, like these are things that you probably wouldn't get a specific question on, but things that you would throw into an answer, that you would include into an answer to help develop your evaluation. You would talk about some of these things, the difference between a market approach or an interventionist approach. So should governments be involved or should governments not be involved? That's what we're talking about here. So would you get a direct question on this? Maybe, but it's more stuff that you would throw in to an answer. But I have, with that said, I have seen Part Ds that talk about um, discuss the view that a market-based approach is the best way to encourage economic development in third world countries, or something similar to that. Um, that has been something that I have seen. Um, so, this discussion here is important. So, what we saw with the move away from intervention and the move towards market based meaning a free economy, free enterprise, um, the invisible hand, price mechanism, all that stuff that we talked about in micro. Um, we saw a move away from price controls. We saw a more opening up, less subsidies, increased competition, um, more international trade, more international competition, privatization, reducing government roles, which is actually kind of an odd thing to talk about now. It'd be interesting to see what the IB includes in the new IB course that they're developing, because you're kind of seeing the opposite move now. You're actually seeing that we were becoming more private and market based and market based and market based, but now actually what you've started to see is a move away from that and kind of more protectionist policies and protectionist measures. Um, so it's kind of interesting that you kind of seen this swing back the other way now, move away from a move in the last 4 or 5 years. You've seen a move away from market-based approaches in a lot of places. Um, But we know that there's no, that's why you get asked to evaluate these things. There is no one size fits all approach. There is no, that this won't always, this doesn't work. You can't just say market based is the best way and ignore an interventionist approach. The government has a role in our economy, and the what level of role the government should have is a big political debate, and that's why there's political parties in most countries, is because people have different thoughts about what role a a government should have. But we all know that there is some level of responsibility that a government has. Government has to correct market failure. The government has to provide public goods. Um, so the government has a responsibility. And if you look back at macro, the government has certain responsibilities, and one of them is to keep low levels of unemployment, this stable um, rate of inflation, and low, or to manage levels of um, interest, um, and control money supply. So there are things that the government, or parts of the government, are required or needed to do. So we can't get rid of it. We have to acknowledge that there is a role of the government, and then you could debate as to what that role is. But the government does have a role, and the free market doesn't always work for everyone, because there's growing levels of inequality in the world. We've talked about that with the Gini coefficient, and we talked about that with the Lorenz curve, and we talked about that with different measures of different indices, different single indicators that they're, and composite indicators, that there is growing inequality, and that the governments do need to step in and respond to things. So the government definitely does have a role, but what level of role does the government have? That's a debatable question, and one that you could easily see on a Part D. Is usually it's specific to the country that the article is about, but questions like, how should the government of whatever country manage the inflation of this country, then you would discuss these types of approaches. So this idea, this chapter, is really going to help you build your evaluations in Part D on paper two. It's really going to help there. So if that's something that you've been struggling with, if you've been, I know we haven't taken a ton of them, but if you've been someone who's been getting threes or fours or fives on Part D, and you want to get closer to the full 8 marks, then these are things that you would need to include in that evaluation. So what I guess I kind of put this slide in here to kind of serve as a summary, um, that what we need is kind of a balance of everything, right? We need what's trade justice. We need fair trade. We need trade that's fair to parties involved. We need to balance debt. Um, we need a free market system that promotes equality, that promotes justice, that promotes equality, um, across the world. That it's not just benefiting certain countries. Um, that we have a system that promotes stability, because economies grow in stability. People won't invest in a place that's unstable. That's why everything that's happening right now with the coronavirus is creating problems with economies, because it creates instability. People don't like it when they don't know what's going to happen. And foreign direct investment and multinational corporations are not going to invest if they don't know what's happening. And if they don't invest, then you're not growing the economy. You're not shifting the 80 to the right. And if long-term investment gets hurt, then you're not shifting the LRAS to the right, and the economy's not expanding. So stability, either political or whatever type of stability, is really important. People need to, governments, everyone needs to be predictable. Predictability grows the economy. So if you're not in a predictable environment, then you'll see the economy slowing down. That's exactly what's happening right now. And then we need to, the last part of here is that you need to, everything is balanced. Like you need balance in everything. You can't go one way or the other. You have to go a little bit of both. And that's the last part was dealing with aid. Like countries can't become reliant on aid, but you can't just say you're not providing aid. It's something that needs to be controlled, and that's really hopefully the takeaway from this is that um, everything needs some level of moderation, and it needs to be controlled. But kind of who controls that and how it's controlled is up for debate. So that is it for 33. Make sure that you submit your notes on this. You can either email it to me or reach out to me. If you have any questions, please reach out. If you want me to cover anything or go over anything since we've kind of finished um, all the new content, just let me know and I'll gladly put something together for you. Hopefully you found this interesting. I kind of like this kind of summary kind of chapter. I think it helps put some of the stuff we learned into context for you guys. So I'll leave it at that. I hope you guys are doing well, and let me know if you need anything.